The Silver Boat by Anne Adams. Dedicated to the little girl, quote unquote, and for each part in every one, the discoveries of separateness and the adventures of oneness. Once there was a little girl who lived in a cold and rainy country where the sun hardly shone. This child had been hurt by many people and had not been taken care of very well. It seemed that she was always cold and hungry. The little girl didn't feel loved. In fact, in the depths of her heart, she felt all alone. During very hard times, the little girl comforted herself by dreaming, especially daydreaming. She would often smile at the thought of running away to a warm and sunny land where people were nice and food was plentiful. One day, while she was daydreaming that is, the little girl decided to make one of her dreams come true. She decided to go away. The little girl packed some apples, nuts, and biscuits, looked hard and long at her country and family, and was saddened that her life had been so painful. She took a deep breath and then set her feet on a path which led to the sea. There she knew, just as she sometimes sensed things in her daydreams, that she would be able to get a ride across the ocean to a warm, sunny, and friendly land. The path which led to the sea went through a large and dark forest, which the little girl had heard was filled with unfriendly animals. At the entrance to the forest, the little girl sat at the foot of a large tree and cried. As badly as she wanted to follow the path to the sea so that she could find a warm and sunny place to live, she was fearful. As she sat crying under the tree, the little girl heard a very soft voice. "Little girl, why are you crying?" The child looked up shyly and saw next to her a beautiful lady dressed in blue light. The lady seemed to be floating, for her feet did not quite touch the ground. And while the little girl was surprised to see such a sight, she knew somehow that the lady was not a total stranger. There was something very familiar about the lady. The child responded, "I am crying because I am sad and fearful. I was hurt over and over again in the land where I lived." She paused, took a deep breath, and looked at the lady. It was not easy for the little girl to speak of painful matters. She had never told anyone these secrets. The lady, who seemed to understand, smiled warmly and with a slow gesture of her hand encouraged the little girl to continue her story. The child swallowed back her tears and went on. "I am going across the sea to find a place to live where the sun shines and the people are friendly. But as you can see for yourself, first I must go through this awful forest. This forest," gulped the little girl, "is full of dangerous animals." The lady smiled and said, "I know all of which you speak. I am going to help you get through the forest to the sea, where you already know there will be awaiting a marvelous ride to warm and friendly places. I could just whisk you there myself, but I and all of the wise people who love you from afar want to see you grow strong. Then you will be able to take care of yourself and be happy." Moving gently within the blue light, the lady continued, "During the journey through the forest, you will acquire much wisdom. Wisdom helps you know what is good and true. It is a treasure which will assist you forever and ever." The little girl, who was very tired, asked the lady in blue light, "Couldn't you just whisk me there right away?" The lady smiled softly, wrapped her blue light around the little girl, and helped her drift into a deep and restful sleep. The lady then sang gently to the child, She sang of warm and friendly places. When the little girl awakened, she was fresh and felt very brave. She decided to do as the lady had suggested, so that she could grow strong, wise, and happy. The lady, pleased with the little girl's decision, continued, "I am a part of you, and I will always be with you. Any time you wish, you may wrap up in this light and rest. If you do get fearful, close your eyes, have your mind reach deep within, wish for the first thing that comes to mind, and then clap your hands." "Now listen very carefully," said the lady. "You must think of what you want rather than what you fear. Repeat this, please, for the phrase is very important." The little girl took a deep breath, stood exceptionally straight, and said, "I must think of what I want rather than what I fear." The little girl gave the lady a warm hug, wrapped up in the blue light, picked up her apples, nuts, and biscuits, and set off straight into the forest. At first the forest felt friendly. The child could hear little birds chirping in the trees, and the ground made funny noises as she went along her way. She was somewhat frightened, but she kept thinking of the bright and sunny land where the people were friendly. She also thought of the mysterious lady who promised to help her through this difficult journey. The deeper the little girl went into the woods, the darker it became. A soft blue glow lighted the path for her. Nevertheless, after some time, in the dark, the child began hearing strange and scary noises. The girl became very frightened. "What am I going to do?" she thought. The words which the lady had spoken come back to her. "You must think of what you want rather than what you fear." Instead of thinking of the animals and the harm they might do to her, the little girl did what the lady in the blue light had suggested. First she closed her eyes. The child allowed her mind to travel deep within and rest for a while. She thought, "I wish there were someone with me so that I wouldn't have to face this trip all by myself." Satisfied with her wish, the little girl clapped her hands. Slowly opening her eyes, the little girl saw that next to her was another child, who was bright and alert and not fearful at all. They laughed. Together they were braver and stronger. The two little girls made a tiny fire, curled up in the warmth of its glow, told each other stories, and fell asleep in the midst of the noises of the forest. Above them was a soft and smiling blue light. Having rested well, the two children set out early the next morning. Suddenly they heard a loud roar. The children stopped and huddled together. Closing their eyes, both children allowed their minds to go quiet and go deep within. They wished and clapped their hands. As they slowly opened their eyes, each beheld the amazing sight of more and more children of all sizes and shapes, all ready to make the journey through the woods together. The children joined each other, singing and pushing through the woods. They grew quiet, however, as soon as they heard the noises of fierce-sounding animals. They heard them shout that they were looking for little children to devour. All the youngsters hid. When the forest again became quiet, the children got together and talked. One child said, "Some of us will have to be very tough if we are to handle the monsters of the forest." To this end, several of the children grew to enormous sizes and became very stern-looking, so much so that they frightened each other. Other children developed different special talents. Some children became experts at hiding. Some learned to run very fast. Others never said a word and were able to be very quiet. Certain children learned to find and cook food, while others became cheerful and entertained the little troop. The group of clever and strong children went through the woods, putting off some of the wildest creatures. Everyone had tasks to do. Each child was equally important. Each needed the other. Working together, the children were very effective. They were so effective, in fact, that when the animals saw what they called the herd of children coming, they ran the other way. The children were jubilant as they marched on their way to the sea. As sometimes happens in life, some of the children forgot or became distracted from their goal of reaching the warm and sunny land. Some of them, in the excitement of their very special talents or skills, began to think that they were more important than the others. One would brag, "I am the most necessary, for I am the strongest." Another would say, "If I didn't cook the food, none of you could do anything. I am the best." Several of the children began to scare or trick the others. Some became very self-centered and thought only of themselves. Others became very critical. The situation was certainly getting out of hand. Many of the youngsters became frightened of the others, and even of themselves. Some withdrew. The little troop of children went forward, but they were not very happy. The blue light shone, but was not very bright. One day the worried children heard a most ferocious sound, the bellowing of a big dragon. All became frightened and gathered together again. The youngsters had put aside their differences to work together on this one, or they might all be killed. As the children shivered, a voice was heard. "Remember to think of what you want rather than what you fear." The children quietly made a circle, closed their eyes, traveled deep within, and wished for a plan. The blue light became brighter and brighter. The troop marched on bravely. When they heard the dragon coming, the children made a large circle around the path and hid behind the rocks, trees, and bushes. When the dragon came to the path, all the children bravely played their parts, just as if they were singing in time with one another. Each child in turn called to the dragon, "Hey you, dragon, firemouth, over here," were just some of the cries. The baffled creature turned to find the children behind each voice. But the children were hidden. As the cries went on, the big dragon continued to wheel, first to one voice, then to the next. Before long, the dragon was very dizzy and didn't quite know where he stood. He bellowed with frustration, but only put forth a feeble flame. At this point, all the children came out and told off the dragon. "Why don't you become a vegetarian? Pick on somebody your own size. You're such a bully. Go away and leave us alone." The big dragon, who by this time was very confused, dizzily slunk away, vowing to himself never to fool children again. Being very proud of themselves, the children triumphantly resumed their journey. The woods were dark, but the children could tell when they were getting close to the sea. Beyond the darkness, a clearing could be seen. All the children broke into a run. They ran to the clearing, through the sand and into the water. For miles around, the sounds of laughter, songs, and splashing could be heard. Out of the mist at the edge of the sea appeared a magical white swan. The swan was pulling a silver boat, which was covered with a glimmering light. Alongside the sea was the lady. "Children," she said, "this is the boat that will take you to the land where the sun shines and the people are friendly. But first you have to make one more wise plan. For you see, the little boat will hold only one child." The shocked children looked at each other. Each child thought, "What if I don't get to go?" Spreading the blue light over the children, the lady said, "Remember to think of what you want, not what you fear." The children became peaceful and began thinking the same thoughts. They realized that in spite of their differences, what they all wanted more than anything else was to go to the warm, sunny land. In their wisdom, the children were able to quietly place this new fear aside. The children began recounting all of their adventures, working backwards from the dragon. They remembered how each child had come to be. The children recalled that they all had come from one little girl. They became separate because of a need for survival and learning. That need no longer existed. In fact, the separateness was creating a problem. Again, the little group made a circle, closed their eyes, and went deep within. Each child's wish was clear. As the many hands clapped enthusiastically, the blue light swirled around and around. Soon the light lifted, and the radiant little girl stood alone, her hair shimmering in the sunlight. "I am brave and strong, fast and clever," she said. "I was one person all along. For this adventure through the forest, I needed to become many. At one point I almost worked against myself, but having to face the big dragon required all of me to work together in harmony. My wish to ride in the silver boat has made me one again. Now I am ready for my trip to the sunny land where the people are friendly." The little girl quietly stepped into the silver boat. She no longer saw the lady in the blue light, but she knew that she lived within her wise, strong self. The gentle swan turned, looked at her, and began softly swimming across the sea to the sunny land. The Silver Boat 2 by Anne Adams. Part 1. "Tell me again, Father, the story of the little girl, the lady in the blue light, the children and the dragon. And, yes," he said, as he began to get more and more excited, "of the swan in the silver boat." Two seagulls were flying high in white against the blue sky. They often flew this way together. The larger gull enjoyed telling his son stories over and over again, because the stories were so lifelike. The young gull often felt himself to be right, there in the midst of the action as the plot unfolded. Today, the father had planned something exciting for his son. Rather than retell the story of the little girl, the gull wanted to continue this story in a very special and surprising way. He signaled for his son to follow. The son nodded. From their place high in the sky, the older gull began drifting downward in slow circles. The younger gull followed, feeling his body and his mind becoming very relaxed, and the circling seemed to last forever. But in fact, only took a few moments. A blue light traced the path of their circles, and soon the gulls could see the ocean spread out beneath them. Just like the circling, the ocean seemed to go on forever. As they continued to spiral downward, the older gull began speaking. The little girl, her hair sparkling in the sun, stepped into the boat. Said the father. Upon hearing the first few words of the story, the young gull magically saw a small silver boat in the sea. In it was the little girl. The gentle swan swam forward, pulling the tiny vessel. The little girl was happy, but also a bit overwhelmed by her trip through the forest, said the father gull very quietly, not wanting to distract his son from what he was seeing. As she heard waves splashing softly against the sides of the tiny vessel, the little girl nestled in the satin pillows which lined the floor of the boat. Sunlight kept her warm as she drifted off to sleep. Her dreams were of all that had happened in the forest and at the seaside. The lady in the blue light floated once again in the child's mind. The little girl smiled, and at the same time felt the soft pillow upon which her cheek rested. The swan, pleased with itself for being part of this important journey, steadily moved through the calm water. Every so often, the swan would turn its long, graceful neck so that it could gaze upon the sleeping child. Spreading open one of its wings, the swan would, for a few moments, shade the little girl from the sun. In some mysterious way, the swan seemed to share her dreams. While most of her dreams were pleasant, the little girl couldn't keep the dragon from pushing his way into them. Her drifting dreams would come to a halt as the dragon once again thundered on the path, turning around and around in anger and confusion. In her sleep, the little girl felt the dragon's anger and confusion as if it were her own. In the boat, she turned restlessly and repositioned herself, seeking some comfort in the pillows. The swan looked back at her with concern. The young gull also became restless. "I thought she was finished with the dragon," he said. "I want to hear about the little girl and her journey." "Ah," said the father gull, "it is sad and dangerous to ignore dragons, or even pretend that they are not part of all journeys, even your own. What do you think happened to the dragon?" Recalling the story once again, the young gull said, "The dragon dizzily slurked away, while the little girl and the children ran to the sea." "That is correct," said the father gull. "But what about the dragon?" "Oh," said the younger gull, realizing that he was going to hear about the dragon whether he wanted to or not. "I never really thought any more about the dragon. What did happen to him?" "I'll tell you. No, better still, I'll show you," said the father gull. "But first we'll have to fly back in time," he said. As he said this, the father gull made another large arc in the sky. Together they swirled around and around through the air. The younger gull found himself once again getting caught up in the circles and in the blue light. Both gulls soon found themselves at the edge of the sea and next to the forest. "Look, father," said the young gull, "we are back in time. There's the little girl and the children playing and splashing in the water. They don't even know yet about the swan and the silver boat." The gulls flew on. As they flew deeper into the forest and further back in time, the adventurers spied the dragon. The younger gull dropped back a bit and peeked out from behind his father's wing. The dragon, who had just been told off by the children, was dizzily slurking away and vowing never again to fool with children. But his vows never lasted, continued the father gull. So deep were his anger, hurt, and need for revenge that the second he started rebuilding his strength, the dragon started plotting his revenge. "Curses, and double curses," said the dragon, as he thumped his giant clawed foot on the ground so forcefully that the trees in the forest began to quiver. "I'll get even over and over again." The dragon had gotten even so many times with so many different animals, children, and yes, even with the very forest itself. And over again, in all his strength, the dragon stood alone. He began thundering through the forest, swatting at trees for what seemed like hours. His mind swarmed with memories, stinging memories of having been slammed and hurt over and over again, of dark objects looming over him. Lashing out at the trees seemed to make the memories go away. And over again, in all his strength, the dragon stood alone. As he tore the trees from the ground one after another, the beast convinced himself that the trees deserved this treatment. He always felt himself to be the one wronged, even if he had started the trouble. The dragon shook with emotion. He took in a deep breath, then an even deeper breath. In all his strength, the dragon stood alone, but this time he found himself to be very lonely. As the dragon exhaled, mighty flames tore from his nose and mouth. At the same time, the dragon unexpectedly slumped to the ground. It wasn't for lack of strength or might. It was sadness which weighted him so. Thoughts of his unhappy victories clamored in his head. Large tears ran down his face and sizzled, turning to steam as they met the heat of his once fiery nostrils. He sobbed, "I'm tired of trying to get even. I don't even know why I am so angry. Something has to change." It was then that he first noticed a spark of blue light on the tip of one of his massive wings. The dragon stretched his long neck while blinking the tears from his eyes to get a closer look. He lifted the wing to the sky. The dragon curiously watched the point of light as it moved slowly, first tracing the outline of his wing, and then, as it spread through his entire body, he felt a warm tingle. Strangely enough, the dragon knew to breathe deeply and to allow his mind to go within. As his mind traveled deeply, the dragon, now completely covered in blue light, could hear the sounds of the children laughing and playing on the water. Somehow he knew that soon the little girl would be part of an adventure which would take her across the sea to a warm and sunny land. As his mind went even deeper, he said to himself, "I wish I could go too. But who would want a dragon in a warm and sunny land?" It was then that the dragon heard a soft voice saying to him, "You must think of what you want rather than what you fear." He thought of fun and laughter, and of not being alone. As if in a dream, the dragon felt his mighty wings, which were still tingling with blue light, spread widely. He didn't resist. The dragon's long neck lifted, and then his body, and he was flying. "How strange this is," said the dragon out loud as he began to fly. He heard the wind rushing past him as he wound in circles through the air in the direction of the sea. He felt different, as if the mere desire to change, in some way, had started something magical. Like most dragons, he'd never really enjoyed flying, but this was different. "I feel different. My body feels so light. I could fly forever." As he spun through the air, the dragon briefly saw the group of children playing in the water. They were having so much fun splashing and singing that they didn't even see or hear him. The giant animal awakened from his dreamlike state to find himself gently touching down at the water's edge. As he looked at his reflection in the water, he couldn't believe his eyes. "The neck is long, but is it mine? My wings are so different," said the dragon in a whisper. Instead of a massive dragon, the mirror of the water showed him to be a lovely white swan. He stared in disbelief at the reflection. "This can't be me," he said to himself as he turned to find the swan. Instead of a swan, there stood next to him the lady in the blue light. "Yes," she said, "the reflection is yours. You too are part of this journey. There is much which you and the little girl need to learn about anger and strength, about accepting yourselves and each other." Then, smiling, the lady handed him a ribbon which was attached to a silver boat. Holding on to the ribbon, the white swan waited quietly at the water's edge for the little girl. Part 2. "My goodness, Father," said the young gull, who seemed himself to be awakening from a dream. "Was the swan really the dragon all along? What will happen to the little girl now? Is she safe? Is a swan, or is that a dangerous dragon? Why did the dragon change into a swan? Has the dragon really changed? The father gull laughed. He enjoyed watching his son become so caught up in stories. You'll have to wait and see, said the father, once again, in a quiet voice, which was almost a whisper. As the father spoke, the scene on the ocean reappeared to the young gull. The swan, the silver boat, and the little girl moved steadily in the immense sea. The little girl stirred from her sleep. Thoughts raced through her head, thoughts of her dreams, of the lady in the blue light, of the dragon, his anger and frustrations. She smiled at the swan, and the swan looked at her. There seemed to be an understanding between them, but neither was sure what it all meant. Then, looking all around, the little girl smiled again, stood up and stretched her arms to the sky. The boat rocked a bit. She purposely swayed, a playful move which allowed her to gain control of the rocking and to hold her balance. The swan turned to look at her, his blue eyes shining in the sun. She waved a hand. As she sat down, the little girl thought to herself, I've seen blue eyes like those before. It was a glorious day. White, puffy clouds seemed to be playing games of hide and seek in the breezes, which stirred high above. The squawking of the two seagulls alerted the little girl and the swan to the spectacle off in the distance. As they looked, each could see dolphins gracefully arcing through the air, first one at a time, then in twos, and then in threes. The dolphin made clicking noises and sang high-pitched songs. Eyeing the travelers, the chuckling sea creatures sent sonar waves toward the silver boat. The sonar spun through the water in silver streaks, which transformed into blue light as it bounced off the travelers. The returning sonar met the now approaching dolphins with news about their travelers. The dolphins gleefully sped toward the little boat, sending mind messages ahead of them to the little girl and to the swan. Greetings from the sea, sang the messages. We are here to play with you. We are your next guides. Before you continue on your way, you will learn lightness of heart. Now it is time for fun. The dolphins seemed to be chasing their own messages. Right in the midst of the message, 3 dolphins shot up from the deep beneath the water and flew high over the travelers, each shiny body sparkling silvery showers of light upon the swan, the little girl, and the silver boat. The little girl, who had only dreamed of such experiences, screamed with delight. The swan, on the other hand, watched cautiously as his eyes became larger and larger. Sensing the swan's hesitancy to join in the fun, the dolphins, clicking and laughing, swam around and around him. The swan, who was not accustomed to fun, felt awkward at first, but as the air became thick with songs and glee, he too began smiling broadly and joined in the festivities by flying in and out of the dancing and soaring dolphins. During one leap, a dolphin flew over the boat, sweeping the little girl onto its back. Through the sea they sailed, and as she held onto its dorsal fin, even though she began to become fearful of this bold adventure, the child held on and allowed herself to trust the dolphin. The swan flew along, bewildered by it all, even by the 2 seagulls who flew next to him. The little girl was about to burst with happiness. I didn't know that I could feel this way, she shrieked. Much to her surprise, she sounded just like the dolphin. At that second, her eyes mingled with the blue eyes of the swan who sat next to her. Both knew that they, along with the dolphins, had been thinking the same thoughts, and enjoying the same day. The merriment went on for hours. Before leaving, the dolphins once again splashed trillions of silver streaks of light upon the travelers. In the midst of the splashing, the swan and the little girl heard, "Remember these experiences whenever you wish. We will play with you in your mind or in the sea. As you play with us, this joy and confidence will return to you." "Watch me, father," said the young seagull, as he imitated the flights of the dolphins. He even tried to click and whistle, most unusual sounds for a seagull. "I love this new story. Flying with the dolphins was stupendous." He suddenly halted. "Were we really there?" asked the young gull, as he nearly lost the balance of his flight. Knowing that his father was not going to answer most of his questions, the son continued without even waiting for an answer. "What happens next? Do they all get to live happily ever after yet?" clicked the son as he imagined sprinkling silver light from his dolphin ark. He was so proud of himself for having learned new sounds and moves. The father gull smiled and continued in the quite familiar voice. After the dolphins left, the little girl and the swan recalled over and over again their gleeful experiences. They were both amazed by the mind communication of the dolphins and by the fact that their own thoughts seemed to mingle one with the other. Both looked forward to more encounters with the dolphins, either in the sea or in their minds. The little girl, wringing out sections of her dress and still tasting the saltiness of the water upon her lips, looked to the sky, to puffy clouds, and off to the left she noticed that some of the lighter clouds were being replaced by heavier ones. "Why is it getting so dark?" wondered the little girl, as one particularly large cloud moved between her and the sun. As the sky darkened, the light breezes seemed to become cooler and heavier. The little girl's hair blew in the wind. With a frightened gesture, she brushed her hair from her eyes. The once bright and friendly sea was turning into a brownish-gray color. Larger waves began splashing against the boat. Even though he began to struggle with the swelling waves, the swan was determined to keep swimming. He swam with all of his strength, but moved forward very slowly. The tiny boat began to toss around, almost toppling over. As the winds became wilder, the swan tugged with all its might, but failed to advance the boat. At times, the force of the waves in the tossing boat dragged the swan sideways and backwards. The little girl noticed her hands turning white as she clutched at the sides of the tiny boat. Her fear grew along with every breath and every wave. "I was silly to believe that anything good could happen to me," she cried. "This feels like a trick." The swan looked back at her. At that moment, he glared with cold blue eyes. He began thinking, "I was foolish to believe that anything good could happen to me. Now I have given up all my strength. I am no use to myself or anyone," he cried in frustration. The little girl said to herself, "Where have I seen those eyes before?" Her fear heightened. Just then, a large wave splashed against the boat, dumping water into her tiny vessel. She desperately began trying to empty water from the boat with one small hand while holding on the other. Her feet slipped around in the bottom of the boat. When she looked up again, she saw the beautiful swan twist and thrash in the turbulent water. He too became more and more fearful, then very angry. He thought of abandoning the little girl and flying to safety, but deep in his heart, this is not what he wanted to do. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes briefly, and wished for his strength. As he exhaled, the swan felt his wings and legs growing. His neck extended high above his body, which began to take up more and more space in the water. The silver boat and the little girl looked very small to him now. The little girl watched this transformation in utter amazement. For a moment she seemed to forget about the storm. "It was a trick," she panicked. "All along you were the dragon." For a second the wind seemed to calm, but out of the corner of her eye the little girl could see something very tall and broad in the distance. She swung her head around. A roaring wave was growing and moving closer to the boat by the second. "I am lost," cried the little girl to the dragon. Their eyes connected. In a flash, Both the little girl and the dragon closed their eyes and quickly thought of the dolphins and the blue light. The dragon stretched one of its mighty closed wings behind him to rest at the side of the boat. As the wave began to break over its top, the dragon opened his wing like a giant fan, sheltering the tiny boat and the little girl. The thundering wave crashed against him, and then, as if changing its mind, tamely curled off of the wing spread by the dragon. The little girl was safe. Then, with wings spread behind him to each side of the boat, the dragon calmly swam through the raging sea, sheltering the silver boat. The little girl was in a state of wonder and dismay. "How can this be?" she exclaimed. It was then that she noticed the outline of blue light around its wings and the entire body of the dragon. Somehow, once again she felt safe, even with the dragon. As the storm calmed, dolphins reappeared, clapping their flippers in the air, creating rainbows and sprays of water and light. They beamed blessings and scores of sacred messages. The dragon came to understand that in order to be nicer, he didn't have to give up his strength. The little girl just leaned back and, together with the dragon, held these events in her heart. Each became more and more familiar with the other, trading memories and feelings without even talking. They grew closer and closer, the dragon with the beautiful softness of the little girl, and the child with the strength of a dragon. Both the dragon and the little girl watched with amusement as two seagulls, an older and a younger, circled round and around. On this glorious day, the seagulls seemed to be celebrating life itself. The end.